This was a huge hit. It's a cover.
Runaway train never going back. Wrong way on a one-way track. Black hole sun, won't you come? Wash away the rain. Black hole sun.
Michael, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Let's talk a bit about your background. You've produced so many records that I love. Not only the production of them, the sonics, the songs. What is your background? How did you get started in the music business?
I pretty much fell into it. It wasn't anything that I had prepared for myself to do or planned on. I was originally an illustrator. That was the future I saw for myself. I was going to be a medical illustrator. Back when stuff like that was actually feasible. I was also really interested in sound. Like when I was really young, my grandparents had a copy of Switched on Bach by Wendy Carlos. It was Walter at that point.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing that record going like, oh my God. And I saw this instrument on the front cover of the record and I was like, what is this thing? Right? And it just made these sounds I hadn't heard before. And I was like, I want one of those. I just like to sit in front of one of them. And somehow I had a summer job and I bought a Micro Moog.
What year would this have been?
That was like 1974. So I was
Wow.
14 and I bought the Micro Moog. And all of a sudden, like I just started playing it. I'd had like a couple of piano lessons, but I mean, I have ADHD, so I was never really good with like lessons or anything like that. I just started playing with bands. You know, I just sort of fell into this whole thing, and one thing led to another. Me and one of the people I was in a band with, we were walking in the East Village, and we saw these leaflets and these that were posted all over like walls and fire hydrants and like, you know, everywhere. Do you like these bands? And it was basically a list of every single prog rock band.
Okay.
We were into very, very obscure stuff. So this was like a gold mine for us. It was crazy. And, you know, come to this address, you know, call this number, blah, blah, blah. We called, we showed up. And it was the home of a guy named Giorgio Gomelski, who was the former manager of the Yardbirds. He'd produced them. He'd produced a lot of prog bands, like a band called Gong, if you're familiar with them.
Yeah.
He'd produced John McLaughlin, all this stuff. And he was trying to make sort of like a splash in the States.
Okay.
Like come together with like new musical groups and like new kind of scenes and stuff like that. And the other person who was there was a guy named Bill Laswell. This was kind of like how we formed our band Material. Like we met at Giorgio's place,
and just a random meeting.
Just a random. It was more like these things, these leaflets that were up everywhere, that were all over, that it had been posted all over the city. You know, and it turned out that Bill had done this. He'd just kind of gone out at night with his girlfriend and like, you know, put these things up on walls and stuff. We just started playing and making records and stuff like that. And over time, we evolved into a team. So it's just me and Bill, and we started producing other people's records, and this culminated with us working on a record with Herbie Hancock that was called Future Shock.
Yep.
It was funny because this was going to be Herbie's last record for Columbia. Like he was about to get the boot.
And then you had a huge hit on the record.
This was his Hail Mary. Like a guy named Tony Mylant, who was his assistant at that point, he said, "Why don't you work with these guys?" And we did it. And we had a huge hit.
Tell me about working with Herbie.
He had gone down an alley that a lot of people in his position would have gone down at that point, trying to become pop artists.
Yeah.
But there was still the kind of like, you know, the sparkle in his eye about wanting to, you know, this kind of like pop stardom that he didn't attain. Meanwhile, we'd been tasked to create some tracks. It was 2 at that point.
Okay.
So we made these tracks at our studio in Brooklyn. By the time we were done with them, we were kind of like, there was just this weird energy about them.
Did Herbie realize that too? Okay.
Nope. It was really funny because the guy who was engineering the project, a guy named Dave Jordan, who's a phenomenal producer engineer.
I remember that he engineered that. That's right.
He told me later that Herbie had come to him the first day that we were there because Herbie didn't hear anything that we had done until we showed up.
Okay.
So we didn't send him any tapes or anything like that. He heard this stuff.
Is this how
cold.
the music business worked back then? That they just like go with these guys? They're going to
We
make
didn't
you a
have
record?
anything like that. You know, there was no high-speed internet. You
Right.
know, we didn't even have dial-up back then. You know,
Sure.
If you sent a cassette tape, maybe, you know, if you could hire a courier service to do it, you know, but we didn't have a whole lot of money to work with
Right.
at that point. It was
What would a
kinda like-
budget be for a record like that back then?
A record like that, since it was Herbie's last record, was
Yeah.
$100,000,
Okay.
which by today's standards is
That's
not
a lot
bad.
of money. That's pretty good.
But
yeah.
for an artist like that, that was basically a kiss off from the
Right.
record company. It was kind of like, yeah, goodbye and good luck.
Let me play the song Rockit here, and we'll talk about that. What kind of instruments are these at the time? So this is 1983 or probably 82 when you did this, right?
83, actually.
83, okay.
Yeah, this was done really quickly, actually. We got the commission to do it, I think, early in the year, and I think we started work on it in like February or March.
What kind of sounds are we hearing though? Like in the intro? Where are all
That-
these sounds from?
Well, from the ground up,
Yeah.
that's a DMX, an Oberheim DMX drum machine, which
Okay.
was very popular in electro music at that point.
Yep.
As I'm sure you remember, there were two varieties of drum machine that used samples. There was the Linn,
Yep.
and there was the Oberheim. I personally preferred the Oberheim for stuff like this because I felt like the Linn had more of like a plodding quality to it. Like
Okay.
I think in a lot of English music, they kind of went for the Linn.
They did go for the Linn.
Yeah,
That's true.
But in electro hip hop and stuff like that, people gravitated toward that sound. It had more of like a snap to it. All the drum sounds were tighter. And so when it came time to get a drum machine, that's what I went for. Plus, it was part of like the whole Oberheim system with the DMX, the DSX, and the OBXA. And I just loved that, like being able to have a sequencer running at the same time the drum machine was
So
cool.
how involved was Herbie with synthesizers at the time?
I think Herbie probably had one of the most amazing collections of synthesizers I'd seen. And he told me, oh, yeah, I've got like 3 lockers full of equipment at SIR. And I was like, you know, he had virtually nothing. And still, at his studio. And still, it was incredible. But one thing he did have that blew my mind was an original Sennheiser vocoder
Okay.
up on the wall, and I'm not sure if you know what those are. It's the best vocoder ever made, and I think that that Sennheiser may have made about 40 or 50 of them.
Okay.
It's the one that was used on a lot of Kraftwerk records.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It's really precise, and each channel pertains to a different formant in a human voice. So he had the Sennheiser, and I was like, oh my God. You know, I mean, if you find one of those now, it's about like 70, 80 grand or something like, yeah, it's really, really, it's like rarer than hen's teeth. So on that track, there's the DMX.
Yep.
Well, the first things that you're hearing are the DMX and this kind of clicking sound, which I created at the end of the record because I felt like it was still missing something to kind of give it that kind of forward motion, more kind of like dicka type stuff instead of like boom, boom, pop, boom, 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 pop.
Would you use time code for this? How would you sync everything up?
This is actually a really funny story because
Yes.
like that was the great dilemma of what I was trying to do because see, we had time code on the tape, on the reel.
Okay.
But it was just basically sync code for a tape machine. It had nothing to do with syncing any kind of sequential stuff because no one had thought ahead. I wasn't prepared to put any sequencer stuff on it. It was just an afterthought. I realized that it needed it. You know, there was no way to do it. And I was like, oh my God, how are we going to do this?
Yeah, how do you do that without it?
So Dave Jordan researched this, and he found out that there was something called a Garfield Dr. Click.
Okay,
Do you
I
remember
remember
this?
those. Yes, absolutely.
So, Dan Garfield, the guy who built this, actually came over to Herbie's studio. He couldn't show me how to use it because with my brain,
Right.
it would have never happened. You know, and plus you needed like a PhD in rocket science to operate this thing. So, he figured it out. I programmed the sequence into it, and lo and behold, it worked with the sync code that was on the tape reel. I know, it's incredible.
It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's like sewing two pieces of cooked spaghetti together, right? It was incredible. So we had this sequencer on there, and then there's the guitar stab. That it just occurred to me that kind of tonality would really sound good on the song.
Blending those things, like blending those.
Yeah,
these...
no one was doing stuff like that. Everyone was kind of sticking with sounds that seemed more appropriate. Everything was very clean. But I was like, why not a guitar stab? You know, I have no idea what I was thinking about at that point. So I couldn't, on a whim, I brought Coda by Led Zeppelin to the studio with me. I searched and searched, obviously this is a vinyl album. It's not a CD. So I'm kind of like,
moving the needle around
all over the place for hours trying to find the right hit. There's no stabs on that record anywhere and none that are in the same key as the song. Song's in A. A lot of what he was playing was in E. I finally found a really good, but it's not a stab. It's just it's just a held note, and it's E. The only thing that we had in the room to digitally capture a sound was a Lexicon M93 Primetime. Do you remember those?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Still one of my favorite devices in the world, and it had that little repeat hold button, which is not ergonomically designed, right? It's just this little teeny thing. I have no idea what these people were thinking of when they made this,
They probably weren't
right?
thinking that people were going to use it in that way, though.
Yeah, probably not. But it had like a whole repeat hold function, and you could do all kinds of crazy stuff with, as they did on Remain in Light, and, Brian Eno used to great effect on some of his stuff. So I spent, I don't know how long, trying to get the right the right sample in this thing, because another unpleasant feature of this was that if you got a sample in the wrong way or something like that, there'd be a nice click in the middle of it.
Oh,
so there'd be a little skip, and I did this over and over a whole bunch of times. It took forever to get the sample. Stabs in E, songs in A.
Right.
Fortunately,
so how do you transpose it?
Fortunately, there's a pitch knob on the prime time, and
You just transposed it up.
I had to spend hours though, because I couldn't get it. I couldn't get a proper A, because the only thing that was on there was a bass guitar. So I had nothing to tune it to, no tuning tone, because I hadn't thought ahead, obviously.
Right.
I was like, I can't, what the fuck? So, I think I brought a keyboard in at one point. I had a strobe tuner, but of course there's so many overtones in this guitar shot.
They can't read it.
They can't read it.
Yeah.
I'm pulling my hair out at this point. Finally, through God's grace or something else, I was able to get an A that sounded like it was reasonably in tune. Of course, now comes, how do we make it sound like a shot, right?
Right.
You can't automate it at the console. You can't mute on and off, so you got to go like that with the fader.
Now, did you bounce those to a track then?
I had to record it through the console. It was just a constant like that.
And you just go, psh,
yeah,
psh.
wherever I wanted it. So when
Right.
you hear the guitar shot on the song, that's me going with the fader. Fortunately, I had good reflexes. And then there's the scratch track, which is comprised of the infamous fresh scratch.
Explain the fresh scratch.
We did this song called Change the Beat with this artist named Fab Five Freddy, who is name-checked in the Blondie song, Rapture. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the song, we were going like, yeah, it needs something at the end. There's got to be something to kind of tie it up, because it just sort of stops dead. This guy, Bruce Lundvall, who had been the head of Sony and Elektra, when he liked music that he heard, he would go, that's really fresh, The word fresh was also something that was very, it was something that was used in b-boy culture and hip-hop culture. We were like, that sounds fresh. And Bill was like, how about this stuff is fresh. This stuff is really fresh. So it kind of morphed into, this stuff is really fresh. We had one of the people who was working with us, a guy named Roger Trilling, get on the mic, and he was just gonna recite it into the microphone, and I was like, wait a sec, because I had this Roland SVC 350 vocoder,
Okay.
which was the thing to have back then if you were doing any kind of hip hop. So I plugged the mic, it was a 57, into the vocoder, and got this sound, random sound on the OBXA, just kind of like cranked the filter open, noise, sawtooth, hands on the keyboard, wherever, and had him say, this stuff is really fresh. And he says, this stuff is really fresh. But when you speak into a vocoder, as I'm sure you know, you have to enunciate everything very carefully. And I was like, next time you try it, how about you go, this stuff is really fresh, like that. So he does it, and it sounds better. And I'm like, okay, one more time. This stuff is really fresh. There it is. Nailed. So we put it at the end of the song, forgot about it. So when DST, who's now Grand Mixer DXT, came in to do the scratching performance on the song, he came with 2 records. One had a Tom sample that he used like 2 or 3 times, and the other was this Fab Five Freddy record. And I was like, oh, cool. What's he going to do with that? And he showed us. He's like, I'm taking this portion of the song, the and the fresh, and he used that in his turntable performance. And the solo, actually his performance on that song, as well as the solo that he does, at that time, it was indisputably the best ever turntable performance. And I think to this day, it still remains the best, if not one of probably like the 5 best ever recorded. And it also turned that and fresh sound into the most sampled sound in the history of recorded music.
Now, does that make your mind explode to see where it came from? And then
it's a remarkable thing. And it's funny because it was basically sort of like a funny little comical throwaway idea at the end of someone's record.
This record comes out and it becomes a big record.
I went off on a tangent before, but what I was going to say about what Dave Jordan told me was that Dave came to me at some point. He told me this later after the record was done. He said Herbie had come to him at the end of the day and said, "This is really cool." And he looked at him and he said, "Right?"
Now, Dave Jordan, just for people that don't know, went on to be a successful not only engineer, mixer, but producer.
That's
worked
right.
with Alice in Chains.
Social Distortion.
Social Distortion, yeah.
Yeah, he was terrific. Excellent producer.
And you guys did this, where did you record this?
We recorded first at our studio in Brooklyn.
Okay.
And then it was in Gowanus. And then we went to Herbie's studio, which was in his backyard.
Okay.
In a little outbuilding, like a shed or something like that.
Out in L.A.
Yeah, out in Los Angeles. By the way, as a bit of trivia, his house was formerly owned by Igor Stravinsky.
Wow.
Yeah, wow.
That's cool.
Wow, right? So, and we mixed at a place where Jordan would work a lot, which was called El Dorado.
When this record came out, did the label have any expectations about it?
This was the end of Herbie's career at Columbia. It wasn't Sony yet. It was the end of his career there. He had already been told he was going to be handed his walking papers after this record.
Okay.
What was interesting was how people reacted when they heard it. They went nuts. Right. I remember because Material were signed to Elektra at that point, and Bill and I went to see this guy Tom Zutaut, who went on to sign Guns N' Roses and Motley Crue.
Yeah.
So he was at Elektra. We played him this song, and his face turned beet red, and he stood up, and he was like, "I have to have that." And of course, we're like, it's kind of called for. The guys at Sony heard it, and immediately they're like, "Oh." I think we're going to have to rethink this whole situation with our good pal Herbie. So the next thing that happens is this video gets made. Like, I didn't hear a whole lot more about it. All I heard was like, yeah, people seem to really like the record, We had no idea what we'd done. I felt good about it. I knew it was the best thing I'd ever been involved with. I mean, I'd gone, in 5 years, I'd gone from a street kid who was living at other people's houses to producing a record with Herbie Hancock. I mean, like, if life was going to get any better at this point, I didn't know how.
Right.
I'd gotten like a handful of money to do this because Herbie had no money to work with. And I was perfectly happy.
Let me ask you, so were there points for producers back then?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, were there points for mixers back then?
That I don't know.
Okay.
I don't think so.
Okay.
But anyway, the video came out. They sent me a copy. I saw it, and I was mortified because it was the vision of like a couple of white English guys, and I saw this as kind of like a serious extension of black music. You know, so it offended me deeply, and I vowed never to listen to the song or watch the video again. And then the video came out on MTV. It went straight into heavy rotation, and
Right.
all of a sudden the song is being played everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
And I start to go, the video's not so bad. After all, I guess.
So you have a hit with this, and then what did you go? What started happening then with your producing career? How did you start getting more work? Did you say, okay, I guess I'm a producer now?
There's only one way to do it. You have to have appointment. You have to make appointments with A&R people and convince them that you should produce their artists.
Right, which is no easy task.
It's no easy task for a guy in his early 20s and also has terrible like self-esteem issues and anxiety. Like I would have meetings, I would force myself to go to meetings with people and I'd be like staring at the floor the whole time and I'd be like, I couldn't get a word out. Needless to say, that didn't inspire a whole lot of confidence in people at record
Right.
companies. So I wasn't getting a whole lot of work at that point. But one day in 1987, I go up to EMI Records to meet with a guy named Michael Barrickman, who I didn't
Oh, yeah.
know. But he was in my lawyer's Rolodex. So my lawyer, Harold, was like, hey, you should go meet this guy. You know, so I went to meet him. Harold's like a total old school, like New York lawyer.
Uh-huh.
And this guy's like, he was really funny. He talked very slowly, very methodically, and he'd look at you like this. He'd fix you in his gaze like that. And he was like, have you heard of a group called the Red Hot Chili Peppers? And I was like, I think so. Yeah. I wasn't sure, actually. And he's like, good. He went to his cabinet. He got out a cassette tape, and he's like, here, listen to this. Tell me what you think. I went home, and I listened to it, and I was like, this sucks.
What was it? What did he give you? Was it
He
their
gave me demos.
previous record? Okay,
No, he gave me
demos.
demos for
Okay.
a new record. I was
All
like,
right.
this is terrible. And I just kept listening to it. And all of a sudden, I started to go, wait a sec. This is really interesting. You know, no, wait a minute. This is fantastic. There was something in it. Like, the arrangement-wise, and in terms of how they kind of like group the instruments together and stuff like that, it just it didn't sound right. Like it felt off kilter, but there was a personality behind the music that, as I listened to it and got further into it, it was just phenomenal. I'd never heard anything like it before, and I was like, this is great. This is fantastic, and I think I can fix it too. So I called Barrickman back, and he was like, you know, he was very happy. I spoke to their manager, Lindy, and I went out to meet the guys on the road, and we spent like a day and a half driving around in their van from New Orleans to Dallas to get to a gig.
And what kind of places were they playing at that time?
They were playing. I first saw them at Tipitina's in New Orleans.
Yeah.
Which was quite an experience. And they drove from there to Dallas. I think it was Dallas. A place called Cardi's or something like that.
So what happened next?
They decided that they wanted me to produce their record. And of course,
Okay.
I was overjoyed. This was like my first production as an independent American record producer. I'd done like maybe 2 records between Future Shock and this one in Canada, but I was making no money. I mean, I was pretty much, I was in pretty dire straits at that point. So this was fantastic, right? So I went home and then I went back to Los Angeles to start pre-production with them.
How much of what kind of budget are we talking about for a record back in 1987 for a band like the Chili Peppers?
That one was $125,000,
Okay.
which again, by today's standards, That's pretty decent.
Yeah.
Back then, that was piddling.
Yeah.
It was minuscule. You know, you had to basically squeeze every bit of juice that you could out of a budget like that.
And you're almost the same age as these guys. You're probably a couple years older at the
I'm
time.
older than them. Yeah.
But barely.
Yeah.
So you're talking to a person that's essentially your age.
Yeah. Yeah. But, you know, to me, they're still kids.
Right.
Right? We had to present demos to the record company in order to get greenlit. They already had a budget, but for some reason, EMI had to hear demos.
Okay.
You know, so there's another hoop to jump through as
Right.
well. Like already they're trying to make, I didn't realize what that meant until later. You know, but right then I was like, all right, they got to hear demos.
Not to interrupt, but usually when you're producing a record, the label's signed off on it. They have a producer. That's not normally the, maybe it was at the time, but historically, I don't think that was as common. Did they want to hear demos just because they didn't want to spend the money until they knew that they had the songs? Is that the...
Well, that's what you would think. But there's another reason.
Okay.
Which we'll talk about later.
Let's play something off that, Michael.
All you singers that be tied behind your rocks, or put down your gun and not hear the box. This is no showdown, so put down your gun. You see, it doesn't matter where you come from. You could be from Park Ave or from a park bench. You could be a politician or a big princess. If you're looking for a fist and you're looking to unite, put your local heads together, make a fist and fight. Not to your death and not to your grave. I'm talking about the Beato. Fight like a brave. Fight like a brave. Don't be a slave. No one can tell you. You've got to be afraid.
When you hear this, are you back in the moment? Can you picture where you were? Picture what was going on? Do you have memories of the studio, or is it just so far ago that you don't remember this?
Everything all at once, stacked on top of each other.
Okay.
It's kind of like just a really like intense flash of stuff, because there's so many there's so many phases to this process. To that particular one, because once we completed our demos,
Yep.
we had to submit them to EMI, right? And the submission process came in playing the demos to the vice president of the company. A guy
No,
named
would you
Neil
go in, or
Portnow.
would you and the band go in?
No. Portnow came to us.
Okay.
We were working at the old EMI writing studio, which was part of the record company building on Sunset Boulevard.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so they had a writing studio in the back, and that's where we recorded everything.
So you went in the studio, you made this record.
Yeah.
This is the first time that I heard of the Chili Peppers was after this record.
Yeah.
People talked about their tours, their club tours, about how amazing they were. And I saw them play, I want to say in 88 or so, at a club in Ithaca where I was living at the time. And they were unbelievable. I mean, they were just this incredible. I've seen the Chili Peppers many, many times over the years.
Who was in the band? Because it wouldn't have been...
I don't think Jack, because Jack left after this record, right?
Yeah.
And Chad came in on the second record that you did.
That's right. It wouldn't have been Chad. Maybe John would have been in the band.
Might have been, yeah.
Was it DH as well? Was DH Peligro playing drums?
I think it was. I think it might have been. Yeah, because Chad didn't come in until he came in on the next record, right? When you guys
Right
did
before we
you
started pre-production.
right?
Yeah.
And also John Frusciante came in on that next record.
That's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
but he was in the band before Chad.
Yeah. So I just remember, hearing about the Chili Peppers, but this record was the first time that they really came on my radar, and so this record came out, and tell me about the reception when the record was done. What did the label think about it, and what happened?
The label weren't that excited about it.
Okay.
But I think there was sort of like a grudging acceptance. Like people sort of stopped looking at them as being like the redheaded stepchildren of the record company, which was great. And they did like a mini world tour or something like that. And I think my proudest moment at that point was getting a copy of The NME and seeing them on the cover. And I was like, oh boy, you know, because I loved reading The NME back then.
Okay, so then you got the gig to do Mother's Milk, which was the record after that. That
Yeah,
would have
that's
been,
right.
89?
Yeah,
I think so.
that's right.
And this is really, they had much bigger breakout.
Yeah.
We'll talk about making that record and the changes in the band that happened. Like, why did Jack leave? And did you keep in touch with the band in between making the records?
Yeah, we did keep in touch. I mean, we were pretty close. We weren't in touch regularly, but they would just keep me apprised. And, you know, once in a while we'd get together for dinner and stuff like that, just hang out. I think DH introduced Flea to John, who was like a Chili Peppers fan and a Dead Kennedys fan.
Okay.
And no one knew of his secret superpowers at the time. The fact that he was a trained, music student.
Right.
That he actually he understood composition. He knew music theory up, down, and sideways, and would spend his time transcribing Steve Vai guitar solos and stuff like that. You know, he'd sit around in his house for like 12 hours every day with just drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes and doing crazy shit like that. So he was absolutely perfect. And he had this like hideous Ibanez guitar as well, which that didn't suit the Chili Peppers too much, but you know, it's a different story. They had to let DH go, and they started rehearsals for drummers, and I thought, oh, this is the Chili Peppers, you know, we're not going to have any problem at all getting a new drummer. You know, the rehearsals and tryouts for a drummer for this band is going to be a fait accompli, right? So I have never seen a more lackluster group of drummers under one roof in my entire life. I was so like let down.
So you were actually at these auditions.
I had to
yeah.
be.
And what were you doing, an SIR or something? People would
no,
come
it was where they rehearsed. It was in a place called Hully Gully.
Okay.
And yeah, it was just this like this procession of like these hang dog down on your luck type drummers. And there was this one guy who was kind of halfway decent, who had sort of like a Buffalo Springfield bowl type haircut.
Right.
You know, who was the only guy who I think came close to being even remotely acceptable. And I'm thinking to myself, Jesus Christ, DH was better than all these guys put together. What did I do? Yeah. And so the last day, we're all kind of, we're sort of done. Just sitting around in a malaise. And last drummer comes in, this big guy, looking around the room like, yeah, like that, like he owns the place. And we all hate him immediately. Everyone just looks at him and goes like, this fucking guy. What a prick. He looks like he belongs in a metal band.
Okay.
He's got like a bandana around his head and stuff like that. He just so like not right. And I'm just thinking to myself, I just want this guy to go. You know, what's your name? Chad? Perfect name. Play your drums. Get the fuck out. The guy sits down at the drum kit, and from the first hit, I was like, oh my God. And he's also yelling. He's like, yeah, while he's playing. Uh-huh. He's so comical, but he was so good.
Right.
He was so good. And something happened in that room that I've only experienced a few times in my life. Like it literally felt like some energy portal had opened. Have you ever experienced anything like that? In a room watching people perform, not seeing a live show, but in a space, something happening that's never happened before when people come together like that.
Yeah.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
What a feeling. It had literally felt like a whole bunch of doors had opened. Like a magic incantation had been recited, and everything just went dum, 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 like that in a movie.
So he just randomly answered this ad that was put in some local paper, whatever would be in LA. And,
Yep.
and he came in and he was the last guy.
The very last guy on the last day. We would have been done.
I mean, in retrospect, that moment changed their lives, changed everybody's lives. The people that are fans of the Chili Peppers, that this guy just happened to drive his car down there and
Motorcycle.
motorcycle,
Even better.
and sat down at the drums, and that was it. History was made there. That was a
And you could feel it. You could feel everything shifted. Yes. It was incredible. It was a really strange moment. And these guys in the band are looking at each other like they're trying to keep from smiling because they hate this guy so much. But at the same time, he's not only the best drummer that they've auditioned, he's probably the best drummer they've ever played with in their entire lives. They knew what they were dealing with, and the vibe was so incredible.
Mm-hmm.
It was so good. You know, you couldn't deny it. So
okay. So did you have to do demos for this record also with him and
No.
get it approved? Okay, so this was so
No.
you were greenlit.
yeah.
You make the record. Let me play something off that. This was a huge hit. It's a cover.
Keep on learning, soldier. Keep on warming. Keep on turning. The world beats low.
So was this Dave Jordan engineering this record as well?
He mixed.
He mixed. Okay.
Yeah.
All
Yeah,
right.
we actually worked with Garth Richardson on a lot of the recording.
Okay. Who's another well-known engineer, then producer. Worked
Yes.
on the first Rage
Yes.
Against the Machine record. This record came out, and then the band really got firmly established as a big band.
Yeah.
Did you have a producer manager at the time? Were producer managers even a thing?
Yes, they were.
Okay.
I desperately wanted one.
Okay.
Because I was still kind of like
explain about this, because this thing. Producer managers really started around in the late '80s, mid '80s, or so.
mid
People-
80s, yeah. A little
So-
earlier.
Yeah, so producers would have managers, and they would
Yeah.
go out and interface with the record labels, the A&R people, and they would get work theoretically for their producers, although usually it was the producers getting the work, and they would just take their cut.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Once in a while we got lucky, though.
Right.
It was better to have a manager because they could handle the business stuff better.
Yeah.
They were better talkers.
They would book the studios. You might tell them, but they would interface typically with the studios.
They would
right?
help. But basically, when it came down to it, it gave you some prestige.
Right.
It gave you more prestige than a guy who's like, I don't have a manager. You know, because it's sort of like a, yeah.
And they would work at getting you bigger advances as a producer so they could get a bigger cut in their money. So they were helpful in that way.
They were very helpful, and they also knew who they were. They had relationships with everyone, so they could do that kind of stuff. I didn't have a manager when I did Uplift. When I did this record, I had a manager, you know, who was obviously very helpful.
Okay.
And it was very funny actually because I didn't know what was going to happen with this record at all, and I was at that point I was continually down on my luck.
That's a running theme here.
It was a running theme at that point throughout the 80s. It was pretty touch and go. So I had to move into like a crappy little apartment in West Los Angeles, and I didn't think anything more of this Chili Peppers record. I figured it would go the same direction as the other one had. And we didn't end on such great terms either. The whole process was very difficult. So I kind of left it as it was. And I reached out to Kathy, my manager, over at Littman Kahane.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, what's the story on this Chili Peppers record? Because I hadn't heard anything about it. And I was wondering maybe I could snag a copy because I figured it would be coming out. And she's like, I can't get you one right now. And I was like, what? She's like, yeah, everyone in the office and all our clients have gotten copies of this record. I can't get you one. I have to get more. I was like, wait, what? And she's like, yeah, it's the most popular upcoming release of any client we've got. And I was like, wait a sec. Did you just say the words I thought I heard you say? And she was like, yeah, this is going to be big, this record.
So this is all pre-internet, and people got their news from just other people.
That's how it
Phone
went.
calls, things
Yep,
like that.
That's how it went.
So this record came out, was successful. How did you get into these records of the 90s? You did a Love Battery record. That was probably 1993.
You're the first person that's talked about that for a while.
Yeah. So that was a great record. It was a Sub Pop record, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Because I always wondered, I was like, how did your connection with Soundgarden happen? How did that? And I always wondered if the Love Battery thing had something to do with it, being another Seattle
You're
band.
a very astute young
Right?
man.
So let me play something of this. This is Head of Ringo. I love this.
Really?
Yeah.
I haven't heard this record in a long time, actually.
So Love Battery.
Yeah.
This was this record I think was 93. It came out. Something around then. Now this was this how the connection with Soundgarden happened?
Well, no.
Okay.
But it helped me get the gig.
Okay.
I had a manager at that time named John Warner who called me up out of the blue, and he was like, "Are you familiar with Soundgarden?" This is another case of like, do you know this band?
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, I think so. Someone had played me a song of theirs a while ago. I wasn't a fan by any stretch. I wasn't really familiar with their work. And he's like, they're going to make a record, and they got a producer, it looks like. And I'm like, well, then why are you calling me? What do I have to do with this? And he was like, they haven't made it official yet. There's still time for you to get the gig. You should go up and meet with them. And I was like, okay, sure. So I got on a plane, and I went up. And somehow, I don't know how, I managed to charm them into having me produce the record.
Okay.
Which was very exciting. And you referred to the Love Battery records. One of the things that I played for them was that record, just to kind of show, because at that point I'd done a Soul Asylum record, which is how most people knew me, between that and the Chili Peppers stuff. But I just wanted to show them that I did other things.
Let me back up with Soul Asylum, because that was, I believe, 1992.
Yeah.
This was a massive record.
Yeah.
Soul Asylum had put out a couple records before that, I believe. Is that right? Yeah.
They put out a bunch. They'd been around for 10 years prior to that.
Right. This particular record was one of the biggest records of that. This was massively big.
Yeah.
Okay? Multiple singles, a huge MTV record. How did the connection with Soul Asylum happen?
I think it was the same thing. I think it was John saying, "You familiar with this band?"
So you're not familiar with any of these bands, Michael. This is right? You say, I think I've heard of them, Soul Asylum.
Pretty much.
Okay, so you go in and you meet the bands, and you're obviously good at these meetings.
Yeah, I guess that's got something to do with it.
Were they familiar with the Chili Peppers records?
In hindsight, I don't recall.
Okay.
I don't recall, but I prefer it when I'm not familiar with artists I'm working with. There's a certain objectivity that I like to preserve, and it doesn't help me out a whole lot if I've ever been a fan of the artist. I just don't feel that I'm able to approach them in the same way. Having worked with Ozzy Osbourne, that made it not as quite the type of relationship that I would have that I would have preferred. That kind of bears the whole thing out. Yeah, I definitely preferred working with people and prefer working with people that I'm not familiar with artistically.
Let me play something off that. This is most people that watch this are going to know this.
Call you up in the middle of the night, like a firefly without a light. You were there like a blowtorch burning. I was a key that could use a little turning. So tired that I couldn't even sleep. So many secrets I couldn't keep. I promised myself I wouldn't weep. One more promise I couldn't keep. It seems no one can help me now. I'm in too deep, there's no way out. This time I have really led myself astray. Runaway train, never going back. Wrong way on a one-way track. Seems like I should be getting somewhere. Somehow neither here nor there.
So that's a great fill going into the chorus. Great drum fill.
Isn't it?
This record that had Black Gold, which was a great, great song, Somebody to Shove. But this particular song was absolutely huge. This was a really big record. This must have changed your career dramatically.
Didn't hurt it.
Now, was this a thing too, where people at the label, or that your producer manager said, "Oh, this is a big record"? People are, how do these things work?
No, it was a little different at this stage.
Okay,
because it wasn't really a major signing.
Mm-hmm.
The guy, Benji Gordon, the A&R guy who signed it, he just had a good feeling about them. They'd done moderately well at A&M, which was where they were before, but they'd had 2 records or 3, and I think progressively they just did more poorly. Excuse me. And so this was a thing where I think someone had put a lot of faith in Benji's ability to be able to call a good shot. And he sent me a demo tape.
Mm-hmm.
And the first song on the demo was this.
Okay.
An acoustic version, obviously. So, and I'm like, why the whole world of music producers is not trying to jump on this and trying to snag this project is absolutely beyond me. I would kill people to work with this band.
Why was that, you think?
I don't know. I can't figure it
I
out.
hear that. It's like, that sounds like a massive hit song to me.
I believe in Kismet. I feel like the field was kind of, sort of like, you do it. So I got the gig. It worked out.
Where did you guys do this record?
Well, we cut tracks at Power Station.
Okay.
In New York.
Yep.
We did bass and drums at Power Station. We did pretty much almost all the overdubs at River Sound, which was Don, what's his name from Steely Dan?
Donald Fagen.
Fagen, yes.
Yeah. Donald
Fagen's studio.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was his place. And we did like a couple of days of overdubs at Pachyderm Studios in Minnesota.
And who mixed this record?
That would be Andy Wallace.
Andy.
Yes, that was the first time working with him.
That's why it sounds so good.
He was a damn good mix engineer. Really
Amazing.
good. Yeah, what a craftsman.
The balances, everything, always the way the vocals presented, the punchiness of it. I remember when this was on MTV constantly, though. This was just a enormous hit. I mean, it still continues to be on the radio or all the time, or be streamed. A record like this, right, with a band that hadn't had a big success till then, how much would a budget be? I don't mean to be the person that asked this. I'm just curious. Were budgets getting
No
bigger?
problem. Yeah, they were getting bigger.
Okay.
As I lapsed into bigger and better projects, the budgets were more. They're less prohibitive.
And is that because of you or because of the record that you're working on, the artist?
I didn't really make any demands. I just got presented with a nice budget, and I
Okay.
was like, okay, great. You're going to pay me nicely. Fine. and I've got enough resources to work with, sure.
This was a multi-platinum record, so there must have been a nice back end for you. And
Yeah.
at the time, what do you do as a producer that starts to have these big records? Did you go out and buy gear? I know
Gradually,
the answer
yes.
to that.
Gradually, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I looked for a decent place to live in the suburbs. And yeah.
You start buying all the things that you wanted to have or that you'd see it in studios, and then you're like, I'd like to have that. And
By the time I started working with Soundgarden, I started to get into gear acquisition mode, slowly but surely. The first major purchase that I made was a rack of Neve 1058s, which are germanium transistor modules, and they're similar to the 1057s. It's just I think they've got all the same circuit boards, but it's just missing a couple of features on the front panel, less filters, and a switchable and sweepable mid-band, but only sweepable high and low.
interesting.
Yeah, and that's what we used for guitar on Superunknown.
Superunknown, to me, is still one of the finest sounding rock records of all time. So many people I know use it as a reference record to listen to for mixing. It has incredible guitar tones, incredible bass tones, drum tones, my God, and obviously the vocals. Let's talk about recording that record. Let's go back on how you got the gig with Soundgarden. You'd mentioned earlier that that one of the things that so you'd had the successful record with Soul Asylum,
Yeah.
right? Was that helpful?
It didn't hurt.
And was Soul Asylum what label was Soul Asylum on?
They were on Sony.
Okay, and Soundgarden was on A&M, I believe, at the time. Is
That's
that
right, yeah.
So Soul Asylum has this huge record, and that always helps.
Yes.
With
And it did.
It helps with the A&R people. It helps with the artists.
Yeah.
Well, they had a big record with them. They can have a big record with you.
Yeah.
Soundgarden had done Louder Than Love, Bad Motorfinger, the records leading up to Superunknown. Grunge, had exploded with Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, and all the bands previous to that. And this was really Soundgarden's time to have their big record. So there must have been a pressure on that as well, right? They have to get the right people. This is their time to shine. Because really, these other bands kind of blew up while Bad Motorfinger was already had been out, and the Seattle scene blew up. And this was Soundgarden's.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. This was Soundgarden's time to have their big record, and they
Yeah.
did.
Yep.
And you produced it.
I did.
Okay, let's talk about. I'm going to play a couple things here. These tracks that everyone knows that watches my channel.
In my eyes, indisposed, in disguises no one knows. Hides the face, lies the snake in the sun. In my disgrace, boiling heat, summer stench. Neath the black, the sky looks dead. Call my name through the cream, and I'll hear you scream again. Black hole sun, won't you come? Wash away the rain. Black hole sun, won't you come? Won't you come? Won't you come?
Okay, is that Chris playing the intro guitar? That's his guitar part, right?
Pretty much.
What is the Leslie sound there that we're hearing? Is that an actual Leslie?
That is a Fender Leslie 16, which I think was also called the
It's a-
Vibratone?
It's a rotating speaker, though, right?
Well, It is a rotating speaker,
I
but
had
it doesn't
one.
rotate like that.
It doesn't rotate like that. No,
No,
I
it's
had
a
one of
cone.
those.
Oh, you did. So
I
you
did,
know what
yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's basically a speaker without a preamp circuit in
Yep.
it. It only has the mechanics, so you have to plug an amplifier into it in order to get any kind of tone going through it.
I don't know what it used to be here. I can't remember what happened to it, but I had one. And I didn't buy it because of this, but I always wondered what that was.
I'd never seen one before this.
Everything about this song is massive. The arrangement is so perfect. The vocals, Brendan O'Brien mixed the record. The vocals, and I heard things like you had pre-mixed the drums. Is that true or not? That the drums that you had.
No.
Okay, so you hear these things and like, okay, I was like, I'm gonna ask Michael this thing. I have friends that say, oh, the drums, were already pre-mixed before they went to the things. I was like, I don't believe that.
No, they were recorded very well, though.
Okay, so let's talk about that. How were the
Yeah.
drums recorded on this?
They were recorded as well as I guess anyone could have in that particular environment situation.
Okay, which was where, first of all? Where did you do the record?
We worked at Bad Animals
in Seattle.
Studio X, which no longer exists in Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that SSL room, which I loved. I loved the sound of it. The control room was kind of iffy. There were a lot of reflective surfaces in it, but you had to make do. And yeah, it wasn't an easy room to listen in, though.
Okay.
I was on a mission with this record. Like, it just had to sound a certain way.
Okay.
With Sonics, like, I'm never 100% sure what I'm going for, but I know what it is when I found it.
Right.
It's just one of those things where your body just goes like, and you're like, yes, that's it. One of the things that was a guiding principle for me on this record was electronic music, like techno.
Okay.
Because I just felt that the rock records that people were making, with a couple of noteworthy exceptions here and there, they had no bass, they had no depth, they had no transient response, no impact. And there was a lot of energy in the upper ranges, featuring guitars and stuff like that. There wasn't as much focus on the rhythm as on the rhythm section.
And the low end.
And the low end. And detail, like closeness. I felt like you could make a record that had everything, that had detail, impact, really unusual tonal combinations that you weren't hearing specifically in rock music, but to my ear might have been more reminiscent to an electronic record. And also feel the vocalist as if he's like right at you, like that close. Like I wanted a listener to feel that Chris is like breathing on them. They could basically smell what he had for dinner the night before.
Did Chris? What kind of microphone did you use for his voice?
Well, it was really funny because when we got started, we went through about 30 or 40 mics.
Yep.
And every one of them had something not right. Like they would sound good in one range, but when he started screaming, the caps would kind of fold up.
Right.
So I finally settled on a U-47 FET that had been modified by Klaus Heine.
Yep.
For when he was singing hard.
Okay.
When he was singing out.
And would you do a different mic for the other singing?
A 67.
Okay.
Yeah.
A U67.
Which is one of the silliest things that you could possibly do, right? And the signal chains for these microphones were ridiculous. Each one had like 4 compressors and 4 EQs. And, so we were doing songs in batches, like batches of 4. The band just wanted to work like that. They wanted to start, 4 from the ground up and finish them.
Okay.
Their thing, it's fine.
Yeah.
And so when we got to the next batch of 4, I was like, this is absurd. I don't know why I thought this would be a good idea. It's not. So we went through another mic shootout, which I know drove Chris absolutely crazy. These guys just wanted to get in and get out. They didn't want to spend time getting sounds or anything, and I was driving them absolutely batshit.
Okay.
We went through about 40 mics, and I started to think to myself, what's the one thing that we're missing here? And I realized it was a neutral microphone because all the mics had some kind of great character to them. But Chris has already got a great character to his voice. So there's nothing that we need to do to enhance that. We just need something neutral to capture it. So I started going for like more oddball mics, like a Sanken CU41 or something like that, or a B&K microphone, which is more of a test microphone, like a 4011.
Yep, 4011.
And we settled on my least favorite vocal mic in the world, Neumann U87.
Okay.
That's what we did most of the record with. It was a very simple chain, U87 into a 1073, maybe a little EQ on it, an 1176, and a Massenburg at the back end, just to open up a little high end, and that was it.
How loud was Chris's voice? Was it incredibly loud?
Chris's voice was so loud that the studio had 5 U87s, and he fried all of them. We got a bill in the middle of vocal recording for all the capsules that he destroyed. No one had ever seen anything like it before. I remember one day he was in the room singing because I left him alone. I realized that he didn't like having people around, so I decided to set him up in the control room with the tape recorder remote, showed him how to use the console, the patch bay. You're on your own. Best of luck. He was singing through an airlock door. I could hear him, and I put my hand on it, and his voice was actually making the door vibrate. Wow. And I was like, this guy's not human. It was pretty amazing.
Let's go back to the preparation for this record. Were there demos? I know Chris made his own demos for things. I've heard the Spoon Man demo, and would you have demos to work off of when you first were they done when you started talking to the band? Was anything done?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So you had an idea what you were working with.
No.
Okay.
I got a tape once they said, we want you to produce our record.
Okay.
They sent a tape, and I listened to it, and I realized that we couldn't make a record out of this at all.
Okay.
There were 11 pieces on it, and out of the 11, I think 5 were usable. Spoon Man was on there. I think what became half? No, Head Down. Mailman, Kickstand, maybe one other thing.
Great songs.
Yeah, right? But everything else was just sort of like jams and bits and pieces, and I was like, you got to be kidding me, right? Like, we can't do this. And I had to have a conversation with them. I think it was through Susan, their manager. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't a good one. You know, I'm not stepping out on a really good footing with these guys.
Right.
Already they're kind of like, they're sort of looking at me sort of like, yeah, like, you're going to tell us what we can put on our record? But I explained to them, look, like, I really feel strongly that you need to write more songs. Like, it's just not going to be the record that it could be if we go into the studio. And I realized that I was putting myself in a very dangerous position with them. They didn't know me. I didn't know them. They could say, you know what? We'd rather get this other guy to produce, fuck off. So they went along with it.
Was Black Hole Sun a late song? Do you remember?
Yes,
that
it
one
was.
of the last ones?
It was. Black Hole Sun was the result of a conversation that I had with Chris, actually. Because he'd sent a bunch of demos at that point. And I realized that he was starting to go off into the weeds. Like, they were sounding like second-rate Soundgarden songs. And, obviously his worst stuff is still better than a lot of stuff that people are doing nowadays.
Right.
But still, it wasn't up to par to what I felt we needed on this record. So I called him up and I spoke to him about it. I was like, what are you writing these songs for? And immediately I got to the bottom of it. He felt that he needed to make something familiar for Soundgarden fans.
Okay.
And I was like, ultimately, that's great. Ultimately, this record is for you. This has to be for you. This has to be your expression. You can't think of what someone else you don't know is going to want. Forget that. They're listening to you. The tail does not wag the dog here. You have to be the person who creates what people want to listen to. You already have you already have an audience. Give them something that you do, that comes from you. And somehow I made sense of it to him. And I said, what do you like? And he said, the Beatles and Cream. I just said to him, okay, well, write a song that sounds like the Beatles and Cream. So 3 weeks later, I get this demo with 4 songs on it. The first one is Fell on Black Days.
Okay.
From the first moment I heard, I was like, oh, yeah, This is so good.
Yeah.
it didn't occur to me for the longest time that a lot of what Chris wrote were essentially blues songs.
Mm-hmm.
It never really occurred to me. But he was able to transpose it into a whole different thing that was so personal and so him that you didn't really think of where it might have originated.
Right.
There are two other songs on the demo, one of which was Jerry Cantrell was playing did a lead. It sounded great. It was kind of Hendrixy. Wasn't appropriate, but it was great. The third song was called Tighter and Tighter, wound up on their next record. I really wanted to do it on Superunknown, but fine. The last song, I started playing it from the very first notes. I was like, what the fuck is this? And I kept listening to it. And as a music producer, my job, I feel, is to listen not for the things that are good, but for the things that aren't working.
Mm-hmm.
So from that vantage point, you can imagine what kind of state of stress I was in at that point, because I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop and for this song to go way off the rails, because so far what I'm hearing is one of the best songs I've ever heard in my life.
Right.
Right? So this thing, it's going on and on, into the verse. It's like, this is immaculate. He's going to fuck the chorus so bad, though. He's going to destroy it. I know it. I just have to prepare myself for this. He hits the chorus, and it's beautiful. And I'm like, I'm getting like these sensations in my body I've never felt before. Like, it's taking me to all these like crazy places. I feel like I'm hallucinating. And all of a sudden, I've listened to this song 15 times in a row. And I'm like, I call him up. Like, I kept calling all his numbers until finally I reach him. He's like, yeah. And I'm like, you're a fucking genius. And he's like, really? Why? I'm like, that song. He's like, what song? I'm like, Black Hole Sun. And he's like, oh, you like it? And I was like it? I was like, we're ready to make a record. Like, I was waiting for that song to come.
That is one of the most unique songs that I've ever heard. In the opening riff, before the vocals even start, the series of these half-step related chords that happen it's so intricate, yet it sounds so melodic. And I think, how could someone think of this? And it's a song that I like to bring up as an example of, look, if you actually spend time and work on stuff, well, and you're a genius songwriter, you can come up with things like this. But songs like this don't come up when you just start with a 4-chord chord progression in one key. And, these things have to be worked over and over and over, and you come up with a unique thing that no one has. There is no song that's like Black Hole Sun.
None. And you know what's cool about it? As well as all that other stuff, just fell into him out of the ether. Just dropped out of the sky onto him.
The bass on this entire record. Well, let me play another one. This is probably even a better example. Fell on Black Days. This has one of the biggest bass sounds that I'd ever heard.
Whatsoever I feel has come to light, and whatsoever I thought of became my life. Just when every day seemed to greet me with a smile, sun's about to fade in. Now I'm doing time. Now I'm doing time. 'Cause I fell on
Oh, I love that line. Isn't that great?
Yes. It has a different note in it the second time.
Oh, yeah, he goes to the roots after that.
Yeah.
Like, he just threw this in. But who would do something like that on the first chorus?
Right. Now, was that just the bass line he came up with?
That was just the bass line he
It's
came up
so
with.
insanely brilliant.
It's insanely brilliant, and it's something that should not work at all. Like, I heard it the first time I heard it, I was like, why are you doing that? And, a few seconds into it, I was like, you're a genius. I love you.
Okay, and when it comes into the next chorus with the tag at the end of the chorus,
Yep, right?
what is that on the bass there? Is that an octaver or something?
I think he tuned his note down.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he just tuned the note down. He didn't have any pedals. He wasn't using stuff like that. And as far as the depth goes,
Yeah.
purely intentional.
So this has massive low end on the kick drum and it has massive bass. How do you pull that off in rock music and have it be punchy like it is? Because it's a balancing act.
It is a balancing act, but you're sort of honor and duty bound to get it right, you know? Like it was just so important to me to have that, you know, to have that kind of depth, to have impact, to have transient response, and to have low end and really, really deep low end extension. You know, most people at that point aren't sitting around listening to Jamaican records.
Right.
or techno or electronic music. Both of which have massive amounts if you listen to the right recordings. And
Sure.
Of course, in dub music, you can't get away from low end. That's a fundamental part. You know, there's a whole culture around 60 cycles, like
Right.
just cranking the shit out of that.
So this was Jason Casaro, is that right? Was the engineer on this?
That's right, yeah.
And like I said, Brendan mixed it. But when you were tracking it, for example, tell me about the bass, because these are things that I always wanted to know. What is he? Is this a DI sound and an amp sound together?
Yep.
What is that bass sound?
Well, he played a Fender jazz bass.
Yep.
He's obviously playing with his fingers.
Yep.
And we also sent it out because I was using subs with the bass drum.
Okay.
This is something that I picked up from Garth Richardson. I didn't have large subs at the time, so we had relatively small ones. And we'd use them with the drum kit. And I decided, because I wanted to go for as much bass as humanly possible, to move the sub over to the bass rig. And then on top of that, I used my trusty DBX 120 XDS subharmonic synthesizer.
Okay.
Which is one of my favorite
those are great.
devices. Yep, they're wonderful. So we had that as part of his bass rig. And we had to add extra compression to make sure that the bass notes would sustain. Because you notice, especially in a song like Black Hole Sun, you know, there are footballs.
Right, exactly.
You know, those are they're
Which is
long
great.
sustained notes, but you
have to
don't
have a lot
want to
of-
have the bass note die. It's
Right,
got to
so you have to
sustain.
have a lot of compression, but that's what gives you that. You can have a lot of low end when the bass is just playing those footballs like that.
Yeah, yeah.
If it's compressed and it sustains long
Yeah,
enough.
it has to sustain. I didn't want to put too much compression on it, but there had to be enough sustain off the bass.
I want to talk about the guitar tone here in the intro. It's such a beautiful guitar tone. There's so many great things about that tone. First of all, is the performance is phenomenal. Is that Kim or Chris playing?
Chris.
that?
Chris played the large majority of the rhythm parts on the record.
His time is excellent. I know Chris was a drummer. He's got incredibly good time. I love the chiminess of this, right? Because you can hear it, and there's so many dynamics in the performance, just right in the intro. It's broken up just enough, but it has this beautiful chime. What do you remember? What you would have recorded through? What he would have played through?
I'm pretty sure that was his jazz master. Before we made the record, Chris and I went on a little shopping trip.
Okay,
And
that sounds like fun.
we picked out this jazz master that actually just sold at auction a little while ago.
Okay,
We picked up a Fawn 50-watt JMP Marshall half stack.
okay,
And so when we went to record, we used a half stack and we used a Mesa Boogie dual rectifier. And we used an AB splitter. And I have to be honest, I'm not a fan of the dual rectifier, but when you put it together with another amplifier, it does
Well,
something.
if you put it together with a Marshall, you get that mid range added to it. It fills in that center that's missing.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's a really, really great pairing. So to me, it's a wonderful amplifier for creating these in-between type sounds. So we just slaved those two amps together and went through my 1058s. We had a 57 and an RCA BK5B or A on
It's a
both
ribbon
cabinets.
mic.
Yeah, it's a ribbon microphone. I love those things.
Yeah.
It pairs beautifully with the 57 as well. And
Would you mic different speakers, or would you have them right next to each other?
no, we'd mic different speakers. We'd
Okay.
just find the right speakers in the cabinet, and we'd kind of find the ones that matched the microphones best.
And would you drive them nuts in the time that you would take to get the sound right? I know the answer to that. It was just it's a rhetorical question.
They didn't like it. I mean,
Yeah.
actually, if you go on the Wikipedia page for this record,
Yeah.
you'll actually see a quote from Chris about how he couldn't stand how he used the word anal.
Yeah.
I was about it, and he was right. I was anal, but my mission was to make the best sounding record I could with those guys, and I was like, at that point, I didn't say this to them, but my attitude was like, either you're going to fire me or you're going to let me do my job. If you want to be pissed off at me, be pissed off. But you've hired me to do this, and I'm going to do it to the end.
Well, the results speak for themselves as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
I mean, this is one of the finest sounding rock records ever.
Thank you.
The drum sounds. Now, I interviewed Matt Cameron, and we talked about, he showed me the Keplinger snare that he used on some of these songs, and he pulled. I was at the Pearl Jam rehearsal space. He pulled it. Oh, do you want to see the thing? Yeah. Pulled it down. He hits it. It's like, that sounds like it right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell me about your philosophy for miking drums and how you guys did it then.
It's funny because what I like winds up being a combination of near ambient and close mic'd.
When you say near ambient, tell me what that means.
Near ambient would be in a range in very close proximity to the kit, but not specifically on any drum on any piece in the drum kit.
Okay.
So I guess similar to how Glenn Johns would mic drum kits up, but different, because I just walk around and try and figure out where certain parts of the kit sounded best and what microphones might match up with that. I didn't do that as much on this project. I went mainly for close mic'd. Jason, who was actually trying to get me to move away from close mic, like he really wanted to, aesthetically, he wanted to go for more of like a smaller miking array configuration. And he said, look, just check this out. So he put two 67s up over the kit, through a pair of Neve 2254Es.
Okay.
With, I think he was basically trying to do a variation on the Glenn Johns thing. And I was like, wow, those sound great. But you know what? And I had him tweak them. And I was like, and we're going to stick them back into the array. And he was like, oh, Jesus. So he wasn't down with anything I was doing either.
Okay.
But I was like, I'm sorry. If anyone wants to come up with a better idea, they're more than welcome to. But right now, this is how it's going to get done.
So this was all done on tape.
Yeah.
Obviously. Anything special about that? About what type of tape machines that you used, and how you did the drums? And did you track the drums and bass together, or would you get a drum take and then start overdubbing?
It wasn't anything special, but I find that every band wants to play together. They just want to play live. For the life of me, I have no idea why. Because 9 times out of 10, every band that goes into a studio and wants to get that vibe sound like shit.
Right.
I haven't seen, honestly, I've only seen one band do it. I went into the studio with Aerosmith one time, who have
made 1 million records.
Yeah, and they played together a lot. And actually, they did a blues jam that was ridiculous. The minute it came time for them to do the song that we were in there to record, it's like Red Light Fever or whatever. All of a sudden, they just start clamming up, and it's like, well, I guess we're going to have to do this the old way.
Okay, so was this recorded with click tracks on this record? Did you have any clicks at all or not?
No, I think I think we would start with a click. I'm trying to
Or do a
remember.
click count off and then
I think
they
we
play
would do
free.
a count off and then he would get going. I don't think he'd played anything through with a click.
Okay.
I mean, his time is
So good.
It's so good. He's such a great drummer.
I want to talk about Kim's guitar solo work because Kim, to me, is one of the most unique guitar players. I got a chance to interview him and Chris from Nirvana. And he has this weirdest style that I love. and the
Yeah.
Spoon Man guitar solo, which I'm going to play here. Now, it's so unique. His playing style is so unique.
Yep.
It has this craziness to it, the way when he uses his wah-wah, and it's very much like his personality. From meeting him, when I met him, I thought this is because he's such an interesting guy, and his playing is very much like his personality. Of course, it would be.
Yep.
When you record a solo like that. Would he just off the cuff do things like this?
As I recall, and it might not be this song, he did a bunch of solos. And he was like, "What do you think?" And I was like, "It's great." But he didn't believe me. So he asked Jason, "What do you think?" Jason would say, "Oh, it's great." He didn't believe Jason. So he went to Adam, the assistant. "What do you think?" And Adam was like, I'm the assistant, and he pressured him. "Yeah, it's really good." Kim still didn't believe any of us in the room. So he starts calling his friends up. By the evening, we've got a whole bunch of people in the room who have nothing to do with the recording except by virtue of the fact that they're Kim's friends, trying to convince him that his solo is really good. And he's like, I don't know. And I'm like, "Kim, please, we've got other things to do." It's great. It's really good.
When you finished this record, did Brendan mix it here in Atlanta? Did you come here, or
Brendan came to Seattle.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was that process like? How long did it take for the record to
Brendan's
be mixed?
quick.
He's very fast.
Yeah, I mean, he was in and out less than 2 weeks. He does like a drum bus, and he compresses that, and he uses the SSL. He might do a couple of, like a few EQ things on the console, but I think a lot of what he does is setting levels. It's just super fast. In and out, quick.
Did the record label know that this was... Yeah, they knew that this was a huge hit record. They didn't?
Well, it's really funny, actually. So you ask me these questions. You're like walking yourself into these like long-winded explanations of
How
things.
do they
Like,
not
I'm
know
sorry.
this is a massively big record?
Well, it was really funny because like the product manager for the record label, Jim Garino, who later went on to manage Chris, he was coming up to Seattle to visit us, just to check in. We'd done 4 songs already, one of which was Spoon Man, I think. We're all excited. We're going to get some like feedback from the outside. He's going to love it. He's going to hit the ceiling, right? Comes in, very nice, sits down, listens to the songs, and he gets up and he's kind of like, "Sounds great, take care." And I'm like, What? Like, you gotta be, are you serious? What you just heard? And you and I and us and what? It sounds good? And he leaves. And years later, he said to me, "You know what? I was wrong."
Oh my God.
It was so funny. By the end, I think people knew what they had. It was a tough record to make. I'd be done every day, and I just feel like I'd gotten my brains beaten out of me because it was so hard to do, and and not everyone was getting along at that point. It was kind of it wasn't the most pleasant atmosphere. And at the end of the night, I would just sit and listen to what we'd worked on during the day, and I realized that I'd been listening to it like 5 times in a row, and everyone's standing there going like, "Can we leave now, please?" And I was like, "This is so good. This is so good."
In retrospect, you wouldn't have changed anything, right?
Anything what?
Exactly. Exactly.
No, I mean, down to how unpleasant it was.
Yeah.
you know, not that I like that kind of thing, but it all fed into the atmosphere around the record.
But you would drive them nuts with stuff, wouldn't you?
Of course.
Yeah.
And to be perfectly honest, I wasn't the most pleasant person to deal with either. You know, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that I was a walk in the park. Neither were they. But that's a different story. That's for them to account for, not me.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to come back to the setup for the Soundgarden for the Superunknown record. Tell me about how the guys were set up just physically in the recording studio when you would do basic tracks.
We tried a bunch of different configurations, but eventually it just came down to Matt on his own. We had 2 drum kits in the room. He'd pick a different drum kit depending on what kind of effect he wanted. One was more roomy, and I agreed to that against my better judgment because I didn't want to have a drum sound like that on the record. But then when he started playing it, I was like, it's a good idea. So I'm glad I listened to Matt on that one. And of course there was the other kit that we'd really spent a whole lot of time on. Very proud of that drum sound, needless to say. That was the one that we did using those 1057, the Neve 1057s.
Would you use those mic pre's on, like, what would you use them on the guitars, for example, too?
No, I never liked the way the 1057 sounded on anything else, just on drums.
Interesting. Was it
Yeah.
the transients, the clarity that it had, or
It was the
punchiness?
clarity. It was the clarity in the way it reproduced any kind of detail that I was looking for, like the crackling of like the speaker cone and stuff like that. You know, the minute details. I didn't feel like I was able to connect with that as much. But when I got these 1058s, it was a whole different experience because all of a sudden there was this extra clarity. And one of the reasons for that is even though these 1058s have the same circuitry, the ones that I have, they don't have an input transformer.
Okay.
No. I'm sorry. They've got the wrong input transformer.
Okay.
I think it's a Mariner as opposed to a St. Ives. No, Gardner.
Okay.
The old ones are supposed to have Gardner transformers, and this had like a Mariner, which was designed specifically for silicon, for like a 1073 or later, and it had the input and output transformers weren't matched. They weren't designed for the specific thing, and it changed the tone completely. The 1058s that I have sound nothing like the 1057s at all. They're gritty and kind of nasty sounding, and they've got this dark quality to them, like a really dark quality. I find that a lot of Neve stuff and a lot of tube stuff, they can get deep, but they can't get dark, if that makes any sense.
Interesting. Tell me the difference between those, deep and dark.
I don't know. I'm not quite synesthetic, but like I kind of visualize things in sort of like a grayscale kind of like way, and with certain like low end frequencies, when they start getting indistinct or too much high mid, like I envision them in sort of as being grayer.
Okay.
You know, and not as dark as I would like them. Even with certain types of equipment, like Pultex, for example, like if you're cranking 60 cycles, it sounds good, but it's still not the right coloration. I think it has to do with the harmonic structure of how things are being reproduced. But with these Neves, I could get this, like, I think with stuff that's transistorized and also has ICs, I think you can get more of that kind of sound. That I'm talking about. Again, it's very subjective, but it's just how I experience it.
There's a couple other songs on here that I wanted to talk about.
Taking
Soundgarden likes to write songs in odd time signatures. When I interviewed Kim, he talked about, and Matt, they talked about that Chris was the one that he loved songs in odd time signatures. The intro to this, that reverb that's on the guitar, is that something that was added in mix?
That's the room. That's the room.
It's amazing.
That's the room. You can hear the trail. That's not an electronic reverb.
How much better is it to have an actual room reverb than using an electronic reverb? Or is it just...
I think it's subjective, really. It's really a question, and situational. It's really a matter of what you're doing and what you're looking for.
To me, that just sounds like it's the perfect dialed-in reverb, right? But it just happens to be the room.
You know what's funny is that, like, I can't stand live sounding guitars, so I kept having Jason push the mics more and more onto the grill, onto the cabinets, you know. And when I heard that, I was like, that actually sounds really good. You know, it's perfect. It just went against what I was trying to go for. But it's one of those little happy accidents where you hear it and go, "Aw, you know, you did that for me. Thank you so much."
So the vocals on a lot of the record are so dry, way up front, right in your face. And it sounds like Chris is all over the microphone as well. Would he sing really close to the mic? I know you said he blew the diaphragms out, but would he be right on top of it?
I'm a big fan of proximity effect. I don't like it when people sing far away from microphones, much to the chagrin of micro manufacturers and the owners of said microphones. But I just like that sound. I really
Did you
do.
say, sorry, we blew another one up? You're going to have to get some more 87s?
What, at Bad Animals?
Yeah.
Well, they showed me the bill, and I was kind of like, they just had to send them out to get them repaired.
What would be a budget for Superunknown? Do you remember?
$400,000.
Okay. And was it a record that went over budget?
I really don't know. No one ever came to me and was like, check this out.
I want to talk about the music business of 1994 versus the music business of 2023.
Okay.
We're going to jump ahead 30 years or so.
Oh, okay.
Talk a little bit about where we are in music then versus now.
That's a very, very broad, like, I mean.
Oh, wait, we'll go back. Paint a picture of the music business in 1994.
It was an environment that was highly corporate, but at the same time, the people running the business understood what their product was. And this is one of the most important aspects of any business, knowing what it is that you're selling.
Right.
And who you're selling it to.
What were they selling then?
Communication. They were selling emotions. They were selling something that would live with people for a long time. They were selling a product that had a long shelf life. In fact, could possibly be indefinite, depending on how good it was. So, if you made a recording that was great and that would resonate with enough people and could last for a long time, you've done your job, because the record company not only has something to sell, they've got a legacy product. I mean, I'm not thinking in terms of, in business terms, when I make a record, but long term, just having the retrospective, you can see how that works and you can quantify it the way I just did. But at that point in time, people running record companies were also music fans. And that's an important distinction between then and now. You still have people in positions of power in record companies that are music fans, but you also have way more lawyers and people who come from other corporate structures and other businesses that are trying to run record companies like they're another business, and they don't understand the product at all. Not even this much. It's basically, they have commoditized it. That thing that I showed you from this guy on Twitter, where he's basically, music, recorded music is commoditized. Live music is all about experience. It's like, okay, smart guy, how did it get like that? You know, you're like, this is some kind of great, like, truism that fell into you from, like, on high.
Okay, how did it get that way?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean,
And when did it start getting that way?
This is a really long conversation, though.
Yeah.
Because you're going back so far. I mean, you could go back to the 60s. I would go back as far as like the 70s.
Okay.
When the corporate aspect of the music business started to be more focused, when music started to be more corporate and people were starting to think about how are we going to make money, even when record companies were private companies. They weren't on the stock exchange.
You're talking about when people started having records and they would have longer cycles and they would have multiple singles on records.
Yeah.
Basically in the mid 70s.
Yeah,
essentially. When
mid-70s.
Boston, bands like that, Peter Frampton.
Yeah.
They would have record cycles that would be much longer. They wouldn't make a record every year like they had typically done.
And business guys started to get more savvy about it. And they were kind of like, what if I do this? What if I do that? And then all of a sudden they're a lot smarter than the artists because they can figure, and the way the human mind works, we're always looking for systems. We're always looking for a formula, all of us. There's always got to be something that's repeatable that I can apply to the situation again and again that's going to give me the same result each time. So that's how it went. And then all of a sudden there's this big depression in the music industry toward the end of the 70s, and they start blaming home taping and stuff like this. And, I mean, there are a lot of great records coming out at that time, but, it's not a very exciting period in terms of recorded music. Then the CD comes along, starts bumping things up again. People start wearing big shoulder pads and their hair starts fluffing out to there and lots of hairspray. And the music business somehow gets back on track, and people in the music business think that they've figured out the combination how to print money or something like that, because everyone's making tons of it. And then, of course, there's MTV. So, which adds a whole other element.
Which came along in 1981, MTV.
Yeah.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, there's a visual component that didn't exist before. So when you sit and listen to a recording anymore, you can't dream your own dreams and have your own thoughts about what that record feels like to you. That's been robbed from you. I'll use that word, robbed, because videos are fun. They give you a nice endorphin rush for sure. And I remember sitting around with my girlfriend watching MTV for hours around the time that Rockit came out.
You didn't know anything about artists. When I listened to Led Zeppelin, other than looking at pictures in magazines, if you hadn't seen them, you really didn't know anything about them. You'd know what they look like from their pictures and album covers.
Yeah.
You would just read the album cover and experience the music.
There was
and
a
that
mystique,
was it.
and there was a mystique around it as well. Like, it was really exciting. And all of a sudden that's taken away. But more than that, you're getting someone else's canned image of what that song is supposed to mean. So it's their impression of what that song means.
The director, for example.
Therefore, it's their impression of, it's what they want you to associate with the song. So you're completely relieved of having any kind of internal visual connection with the song, which I personally feel is so important with a piece of music.
I agree.
To have that kind of internal visual relationship with it, because human beings being so visual, having only one sense engaged with music, which is so somatic and so emotional, you just create pictures in your mind listening to a piece of music.
Okay, let's fast forward to the beginning of the internet in the mid 90s or so, leading up to Napster in 1999, and then the eventual collapse of the music industry. Obviously, CD technology, which happened, I don't know, first CDs 1983 or so, but the ones and zeros.
79, actually.
79. Well, I guess the first ones in the United States, you started seeing CDs show up around 1983. I think the first distributed CDs were in 83. So these ones and zeros that were on there, that were on CDs, little did they know that was going to be, this was a great way for people to rebuy their catalogs.
Yep.
And for the record labels to make a fortune. They could charge all this money for these things, but they didn't realize that eventually these things were going to be repeatable. And when you had writable CDs and you had MP3s that could be downloaded onto hard drives, they could be shot across the internet at lightning speed. People could start stealing music. And music eventually would lose its value. The labels were the last ones to see this coming. College kids,
Typical form.
right? College kids knew this when Napster happened, and I remember when this was going down, and I thought, "Uh-oh, that's probably not a good thing."
Yeah.
Things have changed even more now. We're in 2023. What does the music business look like? Is there a music business anymore?
It's an industry. I don't know if you would call it a music industry per se, because I don't really think that that's their product anymore. I don't think that they're.
What is the product?
I don't know if I can really name it. It's kind of, it sounds like music. It has all the superficial elements of music. People play notes. People sing notes. There are words accompanying the melodies. There are beats, rhythms. It doesn't have the same effect that music has had in the past.
Why do you think that?
It doesn't have the same kind of communicative element. It doesn't resonate emotionally with people. There's a difference between a piece of music that embodies a great performance, a great composition, that resonates with a person. They can feel it in their body, and it becomes something that's so sticky that they can't let go of it and they can't forget it, and it's with them for years and years, probably the rest of their lives. And something that's got like a bunch of really great melodies that is just so hooky, you can't not listen to it, but doesn't have elements like a great performance or an emotional core, elements that give music its communicative element, or it's the aspect of it that's which I think is central to all music, any kind of music at all, from any culture and in any kind of setting, like whether it's liturgical, popular, whatever.
All these things that I've played so far are pieces that are written by the bands, by the musicians, people singing them. They're writing lyrics that came from them. They're singing lyrics that came from them. Chris Cornell's writing these lyrics and singing them himself.
Yeah.
As opposed to most of the things that you hear on the radio now that are done by multiple people, producers. They have lyrics written by multiple people, and then the artist that's singing them really lacks a connection with what is written because they haven't written anything.
Yeah.
Is that a big part of this, you think?
Yeah, I do. I can't dismiss the fact that there are singers like Frank Sinatra who would do the same thing, who didn't write their own music, but they were interpreters. Mm-hmm. The artists now aren't really interpreters, those that don't write their own music. They don't interpret anything. They just basically go and sing the song, follow the melody the right way, and go. And that's pretty much it. And it doesn't give you as a listener a whole lot of room to be able to empathize, to connect emotionally with what's being sung. You hear the person's voice. It has a sound that you like, sonically. I mean, the sonics of a recording are very important. So knowing how to make a record sound good, it's not a bad thing to know how to do.
That's important. Yeah.
That's one of the only things that people are able to do now, is to make a record sound good, to make a record that has very strong melodic hooks that work well harmonically with a piece of music. But you've got music that's completely hook oriented. Like if you're talking about an A and a B and a C section, they all have a hook in them. There's no tension or release going on. Like Black Hole Sun, for example, is one of my favorite examples of a song where you get this much tension and maybe that much release.
Right.
Most of the song, you're waiting for that release, and his genius as a writer is his ability to string you along because you're waiting for a release that eventually comes, but it comes when he says it comes. Along the way, you're treated to little tidbits here and there, like Matt's drum fills. I mean,
right.
How about that last one going into the last chorus? Like bum 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 bum. Psh.
Yep.
That's a beaut. It's just so tasteful. Everything about it is immaculate. But compositionally, there's so much tension. And there's none of that in pop music today.
Let's talk a little bit about AI. Now, I know that you've only made a couple posts about this, but this is something that I've talked about on my channel recently, and I talked about it on my channel for many years. Talking about beat detecting or quantization of drum parts, auto tuning or tuning. They call it pitch and pocketing in Nashville. Fixing the drums and fixing the vocals artificially, or at a certain point, that affects the listeners, right? That affects the way that they interact with the music, I believe.
Sure.
When people hear things that are played to a grid, that are, when I say grid, I mean fixed time to a certain metronome, they have no give and take. They really don't experience music that is, unless they listen to music, older music that was not done that way, that was done on tape, that has fluctuations in tempo and things like that. And then they don't hear things that, so many things they hear are tuned right to the note. So there is no in between things, like things that are below or above. Does that affect the listeners? Is this not just a music thing? It's also a listener problem, you think?
It can't not. I mean, all the technical things that are implemented in popular music are, they've basically become part of that lexicon now. They're inescapable. You become used to it and eventually inured to it. It's just kind of, it's just something that you're used to. And if it's not there, you're more aware of its absence than you are otherwise. And the only way I think that changes is when people are used to listening to other kinds of music, music that was done before the advent of that technology, or people who I guess are very sensitive to how lacking in any kind of emotional core music that's made like that has. So when they hear something that's absent it, and they connect directly with something that is emotional, that is communicating something, they respond.
Michael, that was I think a great place to finish here today. I really appreciate you coming in, and it's so nice to meet you and talk about, get your views on music and where we are and where we've been, and talk about some of the records that you've done. There's many other records to talk about, which I hope we'll do in the future.
Super.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Thanks.
man. Thank you.